The police told me they were closing the case on my grandson Leo's disappearance today. I stood in his empty bedroom, my hand trembling on the worn wooden desk he used for homework. My son Mark had already packed most of Leo's things into boxes, saying it was time to move on. But I couldn't. Leo was only 17. I pulled open the bottom desk drawer, the one Mark said was stuck. It slid open too easily. Inside, under a stack of old school papers, I found a small black notebook. Leo's diary. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to know what happened. I was risking my own sanity, but I didn't care. Mark's voice echoed from the hallway, asking what I was doing. He sounded nervous. I hid the diary under my sweater and said I was just tidying up. Later, alone in my kitchen, I opened it. The first page described a fishing trip with his uncle. Then the entries turned dark. Words like "locked in the shed" and "he hurts me for fun" jumped out. My own son. The last sentence made me freeze. If I don't come back, it's because Uncle Mark finally went too far. I closed the book and looked at my shaking hands. I had to be careful. Mark had a key to my house. I heard a car pull into the driveway. I needed to make copies of the diary pages before Mark could find it. The local copy shop was my first stop this morning. I clutched the diary in my bag, feeling every eye on me. I needed to secure the evidence. I was haunted by the gnawing fear that Mark would discover my plan. He controlled my finances, so he saw every withdrawal. At the copy machine, I fed the pages through, my back to the door. The whirring sound covered my ragged breathing. Suddenly, Mark's friend Joe walked in. He nodded at me, his eyes lingering on the papers. I quickly stuffed the originals back into my bag. Joe made a call on his phone, speaking low. I paid and left, my copies safely in a separate envelope. Back home, I hid the originals under a loose floorboard in the hall closet. The copies went into my old recipe box. No one ever looked there. As I slid the box back on the shelf, my phone rang. It was Mark. He asked if I'd been out today. His tone was too casual. I said I went for groceries. He reminded me he was coming over tomorrow to help with my bills. I hung up and stared at the phone. He was checking on me. Mark arrived early, carrying a bag of groceries I didn't need. He said he wanted to make sure I was eating right. I had to act normal, to not let him suspect I knew. It pained me to smile at the man who might have hurt my grandson. He moved through my kitchen, putting things away, his eyes scanning the counters. He asked about the recipe box, saying it looked dusty. I told him I was trying old dishes to pass the time. He nodded, but his gaze was sharp. He sat down with my checkbook, going over the entries. I felt the diary copies burning a hole in the box behind me. He pointed to a withdrawal from yesterday. "The copy shop, Mum? What were you copying?" I said it was some old family photos for a friend. He didn't look convinced. He finished and stood, patting my shoulder. "I'm glad you're keeping busy." After he left, I checked the floorboard. The diary was still there. But when I looked in the recipe box, one of the copies was slightly out of place. I always stack them neatly. My blood ran cold. He might have looked while I was in the bathroom. I needed a safer place. And I needed to talk to someone who could help. I decided to visit Mrs. Gable, my neighbor who used to work at a law firm. She might know what to do. I needed to get legal advice without alerting Mark. I was wary of trusting someone outside the family. I walked over, the diary copies folded in my purse. Her house smelled of cinnamon and coffee. I told her a vague story about a friend's grandson and a troubling diary. She listened, her eyes kind. She said if the police closed the case, I might need a lawyer to reopen it with new evidence. But she warned me about family dynamics. As I was leaving, I saw Mark's car parked down the street. He wasn't supposed to be here. I hurried home, my heart pounding. Inside, I found my desk drawer slightly open. I always keep it closed. Nothing seemed missing, but the air felt different. I checked the floorboard. The diary was safe, but my address book was on the desk, not in the drawer where I left it. He was searching for something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Leo's words in the diary, the descriptions of being locked up, the cold, the fear. I got up and wrote a list of everything I knew. Then I burned it in the sink. I couldn't risk leaving a trail. The doorbell rang, sharp in the quiet house. It was a social worker from the county, a young woman with a clipboard. She said they received an anonymous call expressing concern about my living alone. I had to send her away without raising suspicions. I felt humiliated, being checked on like a child. Mark must have called them. I invited her in, offering tea, my hands steady, though I felt dizzy. She asked about my health, my finances, if I had any support. I said I was fine, that my son helped me. She nodded, making notes. Then she asked if I had any valuables or documents that needed safeguarding. I thought of the diary. I said everything was in order. As she stood to leave, she mentioned that sometimes family members step in to manage affairs for Senior's own good. Her words hung in the air. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it. Mark was making his move. He wanted control, maybe to put me in a home. I went to the hall closet and retrieved the diary. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to go to the police station myself with the original. But as I reached for my coat, I saw a note slipped under the door. It was from Mark, written in his messy handwriting. "Mum, we need to talk about Leo. I found something you should see. Come over tonight." I held Mark's note in my hand, the paper crumpling in my grip. He wanted me to come over tonight to talk about Leo, claiming he found something. I knew it was a risk, but I had to see what game he was playing. I put the original diary in a sealed envelope and addressed it to Mrs. Gable, with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. I dropped it in a public mailbox on the way, my heart thudding with each step. I was walking into the lion's den, and it meant giving up any feeling of safety I had left. Mark's house was dark, except for the living room light. He let me in, his smile not reaching his eyes. He led me to the couch, offering coffee I didn't drink. He said he'd been going through Leo's old things and found a letter Leo wrote, apologizing for running away. He handed me a sheet of paper. The handwriting looked like Leo's, but the words felt wrong. Too neat, too resigned. I remembered Leo's diary, the raw fear in his words. This was too calm. I pressed him, asking where he really found it. His face tightened. He said I was becoming confused, that grief was affecting my memory. Then he stood and walked to the window, pointing out a car parked across the street. He said it was a friend checking on me, making sure I didn't wander off. The implication was clear. He was having me watched. I left without another word, the forged letter in my bag. As I reached my porch, I saw the same car drive by slowly. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. When I got inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. I pulled out the letter and held it to the light. On the back, in tiny print, was a date from after Leo disappeared. My blood ran cold. Mark had forged it. I heard a soft click from the backyard, like a gate closing. I needed to prove the letter was a fake, and I knew just who could help. Early the next morning, I visited Mr. Henderson, a retired handwriting expert from our senior centre. I brought the letter and a sample of Leo's real writing from an old birthday card. I was risking Mark's wrath if he found out, but I had no choice. Mr. Henderson examined them under a magnifying lamp in his tidy study. He pointed out inconsistencies in the letter's loops and slants, confirming it was a forgery. He printed a report for me, his hands trembling slightly. I thanked him and left, the report tucked securely in my purse. As I walked home, I saw Mark's car in my driveway. He was waiting on the porch, arms crossed. He demanded to know where I'd been so early. I said I went for a walk to clear my head. He didn't believe me. His eyes dropped to my purse. He stepped closer, asking if I had anything of his, like that letter he showed me. I clutched the strap tighter, saying I left it at home. He sighed, saying he was worried about me, that maybe I needed more help around the house. He mentioned the social worker's visit again, hinting that he could arrange for a live-in aide. I knew what that meant. He'd have someone watching me full-time. I insisted I was fine and went inside, locking the door behind me. I hid the report under my mattress. Later, I called Mrs. Gable to check if she received my envelope. She said yes, but she sounded nervous. She asked if I had any other visitors lately. I said no. She paused, then told me a man had come by asking about me, claiming to be from family services. He didn't show any ID. I hung up, my mind racing. Mark was escalating. That evening, I found my phone line was dead. The dead phone line felt like a deliberate cut. I used my emergency cell phone, a cheap prepaid one I kept for emergencies, to call the phone company. They said there was a request to disconnect the line due to suspected fraud made under my name. I knew it was Mark. I had to get to the bank before he could do more damage. I intended to secure my accounts and remove his access. It meant destroying whatever trust remained between us. I drove to the bank, my hands steady on the wheel. At the counter, I asked to speak to a manager about my joint account with Mark. The manager, a young woman named Lisa, pulled up the records. She showed me that Mark had recently added his name to my savings account, using a power of attorney form I didn't remember signing. My stomach dropped. I told her it was fraudulent and showed her my ID to prove I was of sound mind. She was hesitant, saying these situations were delicate with family involved. I insisted on removing him immediately. She agreed to start the process, but said it would take a few days and require documentation. As I left, I saw Mark walking into the bank. He spotted me and changed direction, pretending to use the ATM. I hurried to my car, but he followed me out. He caught up to me in the parking lot, his voice low and angry. He asked what I was doing at the bank, accusing me of wasting my money on nonsense. I said it was my business. He grabbed my arm, not hard, but enough to scare me. He said, "Mum, you're making a mistake. Let me handle things." I pulled away and got in my car, locking the doors. He knocked on the window, his face a mask of frustration. I drove off, my heart pounding. When I got home, I checked my mail. There was an official-looking letter from a senior care agency scheduling an assessment for me. I hadn't called them. I opened it, and a business card fell out. It was from the same man Mrs. Gable described. The assessment was scheduled for tomorrow, and I knew I had to stop it. I called the agency, pretending to be confused, and said I wanted to cancel. The woman on the phone said the request came from my son, Mark, and he had authority to make appointments for me. I insisted I was capable and didn't need it. She said she'd note it, but couldn't cancel without his consent. I hung up, feeling trapped. I needed legal help, fast. I drove to a legal aid clinic across town, using the prepaid phone for directions. I met with a lawyer named Sarah, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s. I showed her the diary copies and the handwriting report. She listened intently. then explained that without more evidence, it was hard to reopen Leo's case, but we could file a restraining order against Mark for harassment and financial abuse. She helped me draft the papers, and I signed them. She said she'd file them first thing in the morning. I felt a glimmer of hope. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store to buy some food. As I was loading bags into my car, I saw Mark's friend, Joe, watching me from a nearby parking spot. He didn't approach, just stared. I drove home quickly, checking my rearview mirror. When I arrived, my front door was slightly ajar. I always lock it. I pushed it open slowly, my heart in my throat. Nothing seemed disturbed at first. Then I noticed the hall closet door was open. I rushed over and felt for the loose floorboard. It was pried up, and the diary was gone. My knees went weak. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. Mark had been here. He had the diary now. I went to the kitchen to call Sarah, but my landline was still dead. I used my cell, but it had no signal. I realized he might have a jammer. I looked out the window and saw Joe's car parked down the street. He was blocking me in. I was trapped in my own home, with no phone and someone watching outside. I had to get out and reach the police or Sarah. I waited until dark, then slipped out the back door into the small garden. The fence gate was locked from the outside, something I never do. I used a spare key I hid in a flower pot to unlock it. I crept through the neighbor's yard to the next street, where I could flag a taxi. I went to the police station, carrying the copies from the recipe box and the legal papers. I told the officer at the desk about Mark stealing the diary and the harassment. He was skeptical, saying it was a family matter. He took my statement, but said without the original diary, it was my word against Mark's. He suggested I talk to a social worker. I felt defeated. I left and called Sarah from a payphone outside. She said she'd filed the restraining order and would meet me at my house in the morning to serve it. I needed a safe place for the night. I went to a motel, paying cash so Mark couldn't track me. In the room, I spread out the copies of the diary, reading them again. One page described a shed behind Mark's house where Leo was locked up. I hadn't thought much about it before, but now it felt urgent. I remembered Mark mentioning he was cleaning out that shed recently. I knew I had to look inside it. Early the next morning, I took a bus back to my neighborhood. I approached my house cautiously. The restraining order should be in effect, but I saw Mark's car in the driveway. He was inside, probably waiting for me. I circled around to the back alley that led to his property. The shed was padlocked, but the lock looked new. I found a loose board at the back and pried it open enough to peek inside. In the dim light, I saw Leo's backpack, covered in dust. My breath caught. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Mark's voice was cold. "Looking for something, Mom?" Mark's voice cut through the quiet morning air. "Looking for something, Mom?" I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. He stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, his face a mask of false concern. I had to think fast, to not let him see my fear. I gestured vaguely toward the shed. "I thought I saw a rat go in there. You know how I hate them." He didn't smile. He stepped closer, his eyes dropping to the loose board I'd pried open. "You shouldn't be back here. It's not safe for you to be wandering around." I needed to get away from him and back to a public space. Every second alone with him felt dangerous. He reached out and took my arm, not roughly, but his grip was firm. "Let's go inside the house and talk, Mum. We need to discuss your living situation." I pulled my arm back, trying to keep my voice steady. "The restraining order is filed, Mark. Sarah the lawyer handled it. You can't just manhandle me." His expression darkened. A piece of paper won't change anything. I'm your son, and I'm worried about you. He started leading me toward his back door. I dug my heels in, my mind racing. As we passed the shed, I glanced inside again. Leo's backpack was there, but next to it, I saw a small, familiar red notebook, the one he used for school projects. Mark must have missed it when he took the diary. I stored that detail away. When we reached his kitchen, he sat me down at the table. I'm making some calls today, Mom, to get you the help you need. That assessment is happening. I knew he meant a senior care assessment that could lead to me losing my independence. I stood up, my knees shaking. I'm leaving now, Mark. He didn't try to stop me, but as I walked out the front door, he said, I have the diary, Mum. There's nothing you can do now. I didn't look back. I walked quickly down the street, my mind on that red notebook. When I was a block away, I risked a glance back. Mark was on his phone, watching me. I turned the corner and leaned against a brick wall, catching my breath. I had to get that red notebook. But how? My house keys felt heavy in my pocket. I realized I'd left my purse with my cell phone and the diary copies back at the motel. I was completely alone, with no way to call for help. A car slowed down near me, and for a second, I thought it was Joe. But it was just a neighbor. I started walking toward the motel, but then I remembered. The restraining order should be served soon. I changed direction and headed for the police station again. I had to report that Mark had the diary and that I'd seen more evidence in the shed. As I walked, I saw a police car parked outside a coffee shop. I decided to approach them. I explained everything to the officer, showing him the copies I had in my bag. Wait, I didn't have them. They were at the motel. I felt a wave of panic. The officer was polite but dismissive, saying it was a civil matter. I left, feeling defeated. I needed to get to the motel, get my things, and then find Sarah. But as I turned onto the main street, I saw Mark's car parked outside my motel. He was already there. Mark was waiting for me at the motel, leaning against his car like he owned the place. I had to retrieve my belongings without confronting him directly. I ducked behind a nearby dumpster, my heart pounding. I needed my purse with the diary copies and my prepaid phone. Losing those would mean losing my only leverage. I watched as Mark talked on his phone, his gestures angry. After a few minutes, he got in his car and drove off. I waited, counting to 100, then hurried to my motel room. The door was locked, but when I entered, I saw that my suitcase had been opened. My clothes were strewn about, and my purse was gone. The diary copies, the legal papers, my phone, all of it was missing. I sank onto the bed, feeling a cold dread. Mark had been here. He must have used his key, or talked the manager into letting him in. I checked the room thoroughly, but nothing was left. I had to assume Mark now had all the evidence I'd gathered. I needed to get to a phone and call Sarah. I used the motel's front desk phone, asking the clerk to dial her number. Sarah answered, and I quickly explained what happened. She said the restraining order had been served at Mark's house this morning, but he'd refused to accept it. She advised me to come to her office immediately. I agreed, but I had no car and little money left. I walked to the bus stop, my mind racing. On the bus, I replayed the image of the red notebook in the shed. If I could get that, it might be new evidence. But how? The shed was on Mark's property, and he was surely watching it now. When I arrived at Sarah's office, she was waiting with a concerned look. She had me sign some additional papers to strengthen the restraining order and file a police report for theft. She also suggested we contact Adult Protective Services about Mark's actions. As we were talking, her receptionist buzzed in. A man was here to see me, claiming to be from family services. Sarah went out to check, and I peered through the door crack. It was the same man Mrs. Gable had described. Sarah sent him away, but he left a business card. She came back, her face grim. He had a court order for a competency evaluation, signed by a judge. It's scheduled for tomorrow. My blood ran cold. Mark was moving faster than I'd anticipated. Sarah said she'd try to fight it, but it would take time. I left her office with a copy of the new filings, but I felt more vulnerable than ever. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't go back to the motel, and my house wasn't safe. I decided to go to Mrs. Gable's house. She was my only hope for shelter. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder. When I reached her street, I saw Mark's car parked a few houses down. He was watching her house too. I couldn't go to Mrs. Gable's with Mark watching, so I turned around and walked toward the public library. It was the only place I could think of where I could sit safely and make a plan. I needed to find a way to get that red notebook from the shed before Mark disposed of it. Failing was unthinkable. It would mean losing my freedom and any chance of justice for Leo. Inside the library, I found a quiet corner and used a computer to look up laws about evidence and property rights. I learned that if I could prove the notebook was Leo's, I might have a claim, but entering Mark's property violated the restraining order. It was a risk I had to take. I printed out some information and sat back, thinking. An elderly man sitting nearby smiled at me. He reminded me of Leo, and my eyes welled up. I quickly wiped them and focused. I needed help. I decided to call Sarah from a library payphone. I told her about the red notebook and my idea to retrieve it. She warned me not to do anything illegal, as it could hurt my case. She said she'd send a process server to Mark's house with a subpoena for the diary and any other items belonging to Leo, but that would take days. I didn't have days. I hung up and left the library. As I walked, I saw a familiar face, Joe, Mark's friend, leaning against a car across the street. He saw me and started walking toward me. I quickened my pace, turning into a small grocery store. I lost him in the aisles and exited through the back door. I was now in an alley behind the stores. I knew this area led to the back of Mark's neighborhood. An idea formed. I could approach the shed from the rear, through the alley, after dark. It was risky, but I had no choice. I spent the next few hours in a park, waiting for nightfall. I bought a cheap flashlight and some gloves from a dollar store with the little cash I had left. As dusk fell, I made my way toward Mark's house. The alley was dark and quiet. I found the back fence to his property and climbed over, my old joints protesting. The shed was still padlocked. I used the loose board again, prying it wider this time. I reached in and felt around. My fingers brushed against the backpack and then the red notebook. I grabbed it and pulled it out. Just as I did, a motion sensor light flashed on in Mark's backyard. I froze, clutching the notebook to my chest. I heard the back door open. The motion light bathed the backyard in a harsh white glow. I dropped to the ground behind the shed, my heart pounding so loud I was sure Mark could hear it. I heard his footsteps on the porch, then silence. He must have been looking around. I held my breath, the red notebook digging into my side. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the door close. The light stayed on. I had to get out of there now. I crawled along the fence line, staying low, until I reached the alley. I stood up and ran, my legs aching, not stopping until I was 2 blocks away. I found a bus stop bench and sat down, gasping for air. Under the streetlight, I opened the red notebook. It was Leo's school journal, filled with his thoughts and drawings. Near the end, there were entries about Mark. How Mark would make him stay in the shed as punishment, how he was scared of his uncle. One page had a crude map of the shed's interior with a note. Hid my phone in the floor vent. Battery dead. My hands trembled. Leo's phone. If I could find it, there might be evidence, photos, messages. But the shed was now under surveillance, and Mark had the diary. I needed to get that phone. First, I had to find a safe place to stay. I couldn't go to Mrs. Gable's, and the motel was compromised. I decided to try a women's shelter I'd heard about. I took a bus downtown and found the shelter. They had a bed for me, and I was grateful for the safety. That night, in the dim dormitory, I read through the entire notebook. Leo's words were full of fear and confusion. He wrote about Mark threatening to send him away if he told anyone. The last entry was dated the day he disappeared. It said, "Uncle Mark says I'm a burden. He's making plans. I have to hide my stuff." I cried silent tears for my grandson. The next morning, I called Sarah from the shelter's phone. I told her about the notebook and the phone in the shed. She said she would include it in the legal filings and try to get a court order to search the shed. But she warned me that without the phone itself, it was hearsay. I knew I had to get that phone. I spent the day at the shelter, making plans. I called a locksmith I trusted from the senior centre, asking if he could help me get into a locked shed for a good cause. He was hesitant, but agreed to meet me later. As I was leaving the shelter, I saw a notice on the bulletin board. A community legal clinic was happening that afternoon. I decided to go, hoping for more advice. At the clinic, I spoke with a volunteer lawyer who suggested I contact the media if the police wouldn't act. It was a drastic step, but I was running out of options. I left the clinic with a list of local reporters' contacts. When I returned to the shelter, the manager told me a man had been asking for me, describing Mark. She said she didn't give out any information. I thanked her, but I knew I couldn't stay here long. That evening, I met the locksmith near Mark's house. He agreed to open the shed for a fee. We planned to do it early the next morning when Mark was usually at work. But as we were discussing it, my prepaid phone rang. I'd bought a new one after losing the old one. It was Mrs. Gable. She said Mark had been to her house, demanding to know where I was. He told her I was having a mental breakdown and needed to be hospitalized. She was scared, but offered to let me stay with her if I could get there safely. I told her I'd think about it. After the call, I looked at the locksmith. "We have to do it tonight." The locksmith, an older man named Carl, nodded grimly. "It's your call. But if we get caught, it's breaking and entering." I knew the risks, but I had to get that phone. We drove to Mark's neighborhood in Carl's van, parking a street over. It was past midnight, and the houses were dark. We approached the shed from the alley. Carl worked quickly on the padlock with his tools. The click of the lock opening sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, using my flashlight. The shed was cluttered with tools and boxes. I remembered Leo's map and found the floor vent near the back wall. It was screwed shut. Carl handed me a screwdriver, and I worked the screws loose. My hands were shaking. Inside the vent, I felt a cold, hard object. I pulled out Leo's phone, covered in dust. I also found a small USB drive tucked beside it. My heart leaped. This could be everything. Just then, we heard a car door slam nearby. Carl peeked out. "Someone's coming," he whispered. We hurried out, and Carl re-locked the shed. We ran back to the van and drove off without headlights. Once we were a safe distance away, I examined the phone and USB drive. The phone was dead, but the USB drive might have data. Carl dropped me off near a 24-hour pharmacy where I could buy a charger. I thanked him and paid him with my last cash. Inside the pharmacy, I bought a charger and found an outlet in the coffee shop next door. I plugged in Leo's phone and waited for it to power up. The screen lit up, showing a photo of Leo and me from his birthday. Tears filled my eyes. I navigated to his photos and messages. There were videos, shaky, dark videos, of Mark yelling at him, of Leo locked in the shed. One video showed Mark admitting he made Leo's life miserable and saying he'd make him disappear if he didn't behave. I had it. Solid evidence. I copied everything to the USB drive for backup. Then I called Sarah from my phone, my voice shaking with relief. I told her what I had. She said to meet her at the police station first thing in the morning with the evidence. I agreed, feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. I found an all-night diner and sat in a booth, guarding the phone and USB drive. As I sipped coffee, I saw a news van parked outside. I thought about the reporter contacts I had. Maybe it was time to go public. But for now, I waited for dawn. The diner door chimed, and I looked up. Mark walked in, his eyes locking directly on me. He had found me again. Mark stood over my diner booth, his expression a twisted mix of concern and fury. He slid into the seat opposite me, his eyes fixed on Leo's phone plugged into the outlet. "I've been worried sick, Mom. You can't just take things that don't belong to you." I clutched the phone and USB drive in my lap, my heart thudding. I needed to keep this evidence safe and get it to the police. But Mark's presence here meant he was desperate. He reached across the table, his voice dropping to a low, threatening whisper. "Give me the phone, Mom. This has gone far enough. You're not well." I shook my head, my grip tightening. "It's over, Mark. I have everything." His face hardened. "You have nothing. I'll tell them you're confused, that you stole that phone and are making up stories. Who will they believe?" Just then, the diner door chimed again. 2 police officers walked in, called for a separate matter. Mark immediately shifted his demeanor, smiling warmly at them. He waved them over. "Officers, thank goodness. My mother has been missing all night. I've been so worried." He painted a picture of a confused elderly woman who wandered off. One officer looked at me with pity. I saw my chance slipping away. I knew if I spoke up now, it would look like the rantings of a senile woman. I stayed silent, playing along for the moment. Mark insisted on taking me home, and the officers agreed it was best. As we walked out, I managed to slip the USB drive into the pocket of the officer who'd shown me kindness, whispering, "For Leo." He looked startled, but didn't say anything. Mark led me to his car, his hand firm on my arm. He didn't see what I did. He thought he had won. He drove me to his house, not mine. "We're going to get you settled, Mom," he said, his voice sickly sweet. "The assessment is this afternoon. They'll see you need help." He led me inside and took my purse, finding the phone. He smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. He thought he had it all. He didn't know about the USB drive. He locked me in the guest bedroom, taking my new prepaid phone. "Just rest, Mum. Help is coming." I heard him on the phone in the hallway, confirming the time for the evaluators. I sat on the bed, my mind racing. I was trapped, but I had one last card to play. I looked around the room for anything I could use. The window was locked, but the lock was old and loose. I started working on it with a bobby pin from my hair. The window lock was stubborn, but I finally felt it give way. I pushed the window open, the cool morning air hitting my face. I was on the second floor, but a large oak tree branch grew close to the house. It was a risky climb, but I had no choice. I needed to get out before the evaluators arrived, and Mark could legally have me committed. I swung my legs over the sill, my body protesting. I inched along the branch, my hands gripping the rough bark. I could hear Mark talking loudly on his phone downstairs, his voice angry. He was arguing with someone about the court order. I made it to the trunk and shimmied down, my clothes getting snagged. I dropped the last few feet, landing hard on the grass. My ankle twisted, sending a sharp pain up my leg. I ignored it and limped toward the street. I had to get to the police station. I knew the officer had the USB drive, but I needed to be there to explain it. I couldn't trust that he would act on it alone. I hailed a passing taxi, giving the driver the address of the downtown station. I had no money, but I promised I'd pay him when we got there. In the taxi, I tried to formulate my story. I had the evidence, but I'd also broken into a shed and escaped from my son's house. It could all be used against me. When we arrived, I hurried inside, my ankle throbbing. I asked for the officer I'd given the drive to. He came out, looking surprised to see me. He hadn't looked at the drive yet. I begged him to view it now. He led me to a small interview room and plugged it into a computer. We watched the videos together. His face grew pale and serious. He saw Mark's threats, saw Leo's fear. He immediately called for a detective. As we waited, the front desk officer came in. "Ma'am, your son is here. He says you've escaped from his care and are a danger to yourself." My heart sank. Mark had found me. The detective arrived, and I explained everything quickly, showing him the red notebook as well. He listened intently. He decided to bring Mark in for questioning. They went to the waiting area, but Mark was gone. He had left the moment he saw the detective. The detective turned to me. "We'll need to take an official statement, and we'll need to execute a search warrant for that shed." It was a victory, but a fragile one. An officer drove me back to my house, promising to keep a car nearby. When I got home, the door was unlocked. Inside, everything was a mess. Drawers were pulled out, cushions slashed. Mark had been here, searching for something, probably any other copies of the evidence. I went to the hall closet. The loose floorboard was ripped out completely. He had truly torn the place apart. I sat on the stairs, exhausted. Then my landline phone rang. It was working again. I picked it up. It was Sarah, my lawyer. She said, "The competency evaluation has been cancelled. The judge saw the preliminary police report." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. But then she added, "But Mark has filed for emergency power of attorney, claiming you're squandering your assets. The hearing is tomorrow." The fight wasn't over. The power of attorney hearing was my next battlefield. I spent the evening with Sarah, preparing my testimony. We had the police report and the evidence from the USB drive, but it was all part of a criminal investigation, not this civil matter. Mark's claim was that I was financially irresponsible and a danger to myself. I had to prove I was sound of mind. Losing would mean losing everything: my home, my money, my freedom. The next morning, Sarah and I went to the courthouse. Mark was already there, dressed in a suit, looking every bit the concerned son. He didn't look at me. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s. Mark's lawyer presented his case, showing my bank withdrawals for the motel, the locksmith, and the copies I'd made. He painted a picture of a woman being manipulated or acting erratically. Then it was our turn. Sarah presented the police report and explained the context of the expenses. I was gathering evidence against my son for the disappearance of my grandson. The judge looked intrigued. She allowed me to speak. I told my story, simply and clearly. I spoke about Leo, about finding the diary, about the videos. I didn't cry. I was firm. I saw the judge listening carefully. Mark's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to trip me up, asking about my health, my memory. I answered every question directly. Then, Sarah played one of the videos from the USB drive in the courtroom. The room fell silent as Mark's voice filled the air, threatening Leo. Mark stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. When it ended, the judge didn't say anything for a long moment. She then denied Mark's petition for power of attorney, citing the serious nature of the allegations against him. She also advised him to get a lawyer for the criminal investigation. It was a monumental victory. Outside the courtroom, Mark finally looked at me. There was no anger left in his eyes, just a hollow coldness. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away. Sarah hugged me. It's not over, but this is a huge step. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I went home, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The next day, a detective called. The search warrant for the shed had been executed. They found Leo's backpack and confirmed it was his. They also took Mark's computer for analysis. The official investigation into Leo's disappearance was reopened. I allowed myself a small moment of peace. I went to the grocery store, buying food to finally restock my kitchen. On my way back, I saw a familiar car following me. It was Joe, Mark's friend. He didn't do anything, just drove slowly behind me for a few blocks before turning off. The message was clear. I was still being watched. When I got home, there was an envelope taped to my door. No stamp, no address. Inside was a single key and a note. The storage unit. You want answers? Here they are. Don't bring the police. It was Mark's handwriting. The key felt cold and heavy in my hand. The note was a clear trap, but I had to know what was in the storage unit. I couldn't involve the police yet, not without knowing what I was walking into. I called Sarah and told her about the key. She urged me not to go alone, to let the police handle it. But I knew if I waited, whatever was there might be gone. I decided to go, but I wouldn't be completely foolish. I drove to the storage facility address printed on the key tag. It was on the outskirts of town, a place of long, low buildings with rolling metal doors. I found Unit 214. I sat in my car for a long time, watching. The place was quiet. I saw a security camera pointed at the units. I got out and approached the door, my heart pounding. I slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. I took a deep breath and rolled the door up. The unit was mostly empty. In the center sat a single, small cardboard box. I stepped inside, the metal door rattling shut behind me. I opened the box. Inside were Leo's things: his favorite jacket, a stack of his drawings, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a letter from Leo. Grandma, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. Uncle Mark made me write a letter saying I was running away. He said he'd hurt you if I didn't. He's been taking money from your account for years. He has a gambling problem. He was going to sell the house from under you. I found out. And he got scary. I'm so sorry. I hid this box here. I love you. I sank to the concrete floor, the letter clutched to my chest. It wasn't just about cruelty, it was about money. My money. Mark was draining me to feed his addiction, and Leo had discovered it. The door to the unit suddenly began to roll down. I scrambled to my feet, but it closed with a final clang, plunging me into near darkness. The only light came from a small vent near the ceiling. I was locked in. I heard footsteps outside. Mark's voice was calm. I knew you'd come, Mum. You just couldn't leave it alone. I shouted for help, pounding on the metal door, but the facility was deserted. They'll find me, I yelled. They know I'm here. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Do they? I told you not to bring the police. I disabled the security camera. It's just us now. I heard his footsteps walk away, Then the sound of his car starting and driving off. I was trapped. I felt a wave of claustrophobia. I looked around the dark, empty unit. The box with Leo's letter was my only company. I sat down, leaning against the cold wall. I had my new prepaid phone in my pocket. I took it out. No signal. Of course. I was buried in a metal box. I tried to think. The vent. It was small, but maybe I could get a signal there. I stacked the empty box and stood on it, reaching my arm up toward the vent. I held the phone as high as I could. One bar flickered. It was enough. I typed a quick text to Sarah and the detective I'd been working with. Trapped. Storage Unit 214, A1 storage, Mark. I pressed send and prayed it would go through. Then I waited in the dark, listening to the sound of my own breathing. Time stretched in the darkness of the storage unit. I clung to Leo's letter, its words a small comfort in the oppressive silence. I didn't know if my text had sent. I had to assume help was coming, but I also had to prepare for the possibility that it wasn't. I felt around the walls, searching for any weakness, any tool. My fingers brushed against a loose piece of metal trim near the floor. I worked it back and forth until it came free in my hand. It was thin and sharp. It wasn't much, but it was something. I heard a car engine outside, then the crunch of gravel. My heart leapt. Had someone come? The unit's door suddenly began to roll up, flooding the space with blinding afternoon light. I shielded my eyes, the piece of metal hidden in my sleeve. It wasn't the police. It was Mark. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, alone. "Change of plans, Mum," he said, his voice flat. "We're going for a drive." I knew if I got in that car, I might never come back. "The police are on their way, Mark." I texted them. He smiled, a tired, broken smile. "No, they're not. I have a jammer. Your phone hasn't worked since you got here." My hope shattered. He stepped into the unit, reaching for my arm. "It's time to go." As his hand closed around my wrist, I brought my other arm around, slashing the piece of metal trim across his forearm. It wasn't a deep cut, but it was sharp and surprising. He yelled in pain and shock, letting go of me. I tried to dart past him, but he recovered quickly, blocking the doorway. His eyes were wild now. "You just had to make this difficult," he snarled. He advanced on me, and I backed further into the unit, toward the corner. There was nowhere to run. Suddenly, the blare of a police siren cut through the air. Red and blue lights flashed, reflecting off the metal walls of the unit. Mark froze, his head whipping toward the entrance. 2 police officers stood there, weapons drawn. "Step away from her, Mark. Hands where we can see them." My text had gotten through after all. Mark slowly raised his hands, his shoulders slumping in defeat. An officer rushed in and led me out into the fresh air while another cuffed Mark. The detective I'd worked with approached me. "We got your text. Are you all right?" I nodded, unable to speak. I watched as they put Mark in the back of a patrol car. He didn't look at me. The detective handed me Leo's box. "We'll need this as evidence, but you can keep the letter for now." I held the box tightly. It was over. Mark was arrested. The search of his computer would provide more evidence, and with my testimony and Leo's letter, he would face justice. I was taken to the station to give a full statement. When I was done, Sarah was there to drive me home. The sun was setting as we pulled up to my house. It felt different now, lighter. The threat was gone, but the house was also emptier than ever. I went inside and placed Leo's box on the kitchen table. I made a cup of tea and sat down, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The fight was won, but Leo was still gone. The victory felt hollow. I looked at his letter again. He loved me. He tried to protect me. That had to be enough. For now, it was all I had. The silence in my house was louder than any noise after the police took Mark away. I sat at the kitchen table, Leo's letter in my hands, reading his words over and over. He was trying to protect me. Now I had to protect his memory. I wanted to make sure Mark never hurt anyone again, but I had to face the legal system alone. The next morning, Detective Miller called. He said Mark was being charged with unlawful imprisonment, theft, and filing a false report. But without a body, the charges for Leo's disappearance were weaker. He asked if I would testify at the preliminary hearing. I agreed without hesitation. I owed that to Leo. Later that day, a process server delivered a subpoena from Mark's new lawyer, demanding all my financial records and medical history. They were going to try to paint me as incompetent. I felt the pressure building. I called Sarah, and she assured me we could fight it. But I needed to gather all my documents. I spent the afternoon pulling out bank statements and health reports from the last 5 years. As I sorted through the papers, I found an old insurance policy I'd forgotten about, one that named Leo as a beneficiary. It made me wonder if Mark had known about it. That evening, Mrs. Gable came over with a casserole. She sat with me, and we talked about Leo. She mentioned that a few weeks before he disappeared, Leo had asked her about safe deposit boxes. He said he wanted to put something important where no one could find it. I stored that information away. After she left, I looked up the local banks. There were only 3. I decided to visit them tomorrow to ask if Leo had a box. It was a long shot, but I had to try. As I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a man's voice said, "Drop the charges, or you'll regret it." Then he hung up. I stood there, the phone shaking in my hand. It wasn't Mark's voice. He must have someone helping him from the outside. I went to the first bank on my list, a small branch downtown. I asked the manager if Leo had ever rented a safe deposit box there. He checked the records and said no. I tried the second bank with the same result. At the third bank, the manager, a kind older woman, remembered Leo. She said he came in about a month before he vanished and asked about boxes, but he didn't rent one because he was under 18 and needed a parent's consent. My heart sank. It was another dead end. I needed to find what Leo wanted to hide, but the trail was cold. This search was draining my energy, and the anonymous call last night left me on edge. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Mark's lawyer requesting a meeting to discuss a family resolution. I knew it was a trap to get me to drop the charges. I called Sarah, and she advised me to ignore it and let the legal process work. Later, Detective Miller called with an update. They had searched Mark's computer and found evidence of large gambling debts and multiple transfers from my accounts over the years. He said this strengthened the theft case. But they still had no leads on Leo's whereabouts. He asked if I had any other ideas. I told him about the safe deposit box lead and the anonymous threat. He said he would look into it and suggested I be careful. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Leo's note in the red notebook about hiding his phone. What else did he hide? I got up and went through his box again. Under his drawings, I found a small, folded map of the city bus routes. One stop was circled in red pen, the library. It was the main branch where he used to study. I decided to go there first thing in the morning. Maybe he left something in a locker or with a librarian. As I was leaving the house, I saw a car parked across the street with a man inside. He didn't move, just watched me. I got in my car and drove off, my hands tight on the wheel. When I reached the library, I looked back. The car was gone. The library was quiet and smelled of old books and floor wax. I went to the information desk and asked if anyone remembered Leo. The librarian, a young man with glasses, said he did. He said Leo often used the study rooms and sometimes left things in the lost and found. He led me to a back room with bins of lost items. We looked through them, but there was nothing of Leo's. Then the librarian remembered that Leo had a friend who worked there, a volunteer named Emily. He called her over. Emily was a teenager with kind eyes. She said Leo gave her a small envelope to hold for him a week before he disappeared. She said he told her to only give it to his grandmother if something happened to him. My breath caught. She went to her locker and retrieved the envelope. I thanked her and sat at a table to open it. Inside was a USB drive, just like the one from the shed, and a note from Leo. "Grandma, if you have this, I'm sorry. Uncle Mark was stealing from you. I recorded him talking about it. I was scared. I love you." I rushed home to view the USB drive on my computer. It contained audio files. I played one. It was Mark's voice, clear and angry, talking to someone about needing money and saying, "The old lady won't notice if I take a little more, and if the kid gets in the way, I'll handle it." I had more evidence. I called Detective Miller immediately and told him what I found. He said he would send an officer to pick it up. After the call, I felt a surge of hope. This could be what they needed to press harder charges. But it was painful to hear my son's voice plotting against me. Later that day, Sarah called. She said Mark's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal, offering to reveal what happened to Leo in exchange for lighter sentences. She advised me to think about it, but I said no. I wanted full justice, not a bargain. That evening, I was in the kitchen making tea when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was Joe, Mark's friend. He had an envelope in his hand. I didn't open the door. He slid the envelope under it and left. I picked it up. It was a photo of Leo, looking scared, with a date stamp from after he disappeared. My hands trembled. Was he still alive? The photo of Leo shook me to my core. He looked thinner, his eyes wide with fear. The date was from just 2 weeks ago. If this was real, he might still be alive. I called Detective Miller right away and described the photo. He said to bring it to the station immediately. I drove there, the photo on the passenger seat. At the station, Miller examined it. He said it could be a fake, meant to manipulate me, but they would have their forensics team analyze it. He also said they were bringing Joe in for questioning about the threat and the photo. I felt a mix of hope and dread. If Leo was alive, where was he? And why would Joe have this? The pressure was immense, and I knew Mark was behind it somehow. Back home, I tried to distract myself by cleaning, but my mind kept going back to the photo. Later, Miller called. They had questioned Joe, and he admitted that Mark gave him the photo and told him to deliver it to scare me into dropping the charges. Joe said he didn't know where Leo was, or if the photo was real. Miller said they were checking the metadata on the digital version Joe had on his phone. The next day, Sarah came over to discuss the court proceedings. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for next week. She said with the new evidence from the USB drive and the photo, the case was stronger, but it would be a tough fight. She warned me that Mark's lawyer would try to discredit me. I told her I was ready. That evening, I visited Leo's favorite park, where we used to feed the ducks. I sat on a bench and cried for the first time in weeks. I missed him so much. As I was leaving, an older woman approached me. She said she saw me with Leo often and wanted to say she was sorry for my loss. She mentioned that she saw Leo with a man a few times near the bus station, looking upset. She described the man, and it sounded like Mark. I thanked her and went home. The pieces were coming together, but it was like a puzzle with missing parts. When I got home, there was a message from Miller. The photo was a fake, digitally altered from an older picture. Leo was still missing. I sat in the dark, feeling the weight of it all. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You should have taken the deal." The fake photo and the threatening text made it clear. Mark and his allies weren't giving up. I had to stay strong for the hearing. I spent the next days preparing with Sarah, going over my testimony and the evidence. Reliving every painful moment was hard, but I was determined. The morning of the preliminary hearing, I dressed carefully and drove to the courthouse. Sarah met me there. Inside, the room was formal and quiet. Mark was brought in, wearing an orange jumpsuit. He didn't look at me. The judge listened as the prosecutor presented the evidence: the diaries, the videos, the audio recordings, and the financial records. Mark's lawyer argued that I was a confused old woman and that Mark was a caring son. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly about finding the diary, the threats, and the theft. I didn't break down. I saw the judge taking notes. After the arguments, the judge ruled that there was enough evidence for a trial on all charges, including potential charges related to Leo's disappearance if more evidence emerged. Mark was denied bail. It was a victory, but a small one. The trial would be long and painful. After the hearing, I felt exhausted but relieved. As I was leaving the courthouse, a reporter approached me, asking for a comment. I said no and kept walking. When I got home, I realized I had a voicemail from the bank where I had the insurance policy. They said there was an issue with the beneficiary since Leo was missing. I called them back and explained the situation. They said they would put a hold on it until things were resolved. That night, I sat in Leo's room, holding his jacket. I knew I might never know what happened to him, but I had done everything I could to seek justice. I decided to start a memorial fund in his name at the library so other kids could have books and safe places to study. It was a small thing, but it felt right. As I was falling asleep, my phone rang. It was Detective Miller. He said, "We got a break. A truck driver came forward. He thinks he saw Leo getting on a bus to another state the day he disappeared." Detective Miller's call about the truck driver seeing Leo sent a jolt through me. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. He said a long-haul driver came forward after seeing a news segment, claiming he saw a boy matching Leo's description buying a bus ticket to Oregon the day he vanished. I had to follow this lead, no matter how slim. It meant risking my fragile peace and diving back into the nightmare. But the thought of Leo being alive out there kept me going. I arranged to meet the truck driver, a man named Carl, at a diner near the bus station. Detective Miller offered to come, but I wanted to do this myself. When I arrived, Carl was already in a booth, a large man with a kind face. He described seeing a scared, thin boy with a backpack, looking over his shoulder. He said the boy paid cash and seemed relieved when the bus left. It sounded like Leo. Carl gave me the bus number and the time. I thanked him and left, my mind spinning. I needed to check the bus company's records, but that required police involvement. I called Detective Miller and passed on the information. He said he would request the passenger manifest from that day. The rest of the day felt like a blur. I went home and pulled out a map, tracing the bus route to Oregon. Why Oregon? Leo had no connections there. Later, Mrs. Gable called, checking on me. I told her about the lead, and she offered to help in any way. That evening, I found an old photo album and looked at pictures of Leo. He looked so young and happy. The phone rang, startling me. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a voice said, "Stop digging. You won't like what you find." Then the line went dead. I held the phone, my hands shaking. They were still watching me. I decided to call the bus company myself in the morning, even if it was a long shot. I went to bed, but couldn't sleep. The image of Leo on a bus, alone and scared, haunted me. I got up and wrote down everything I knew: the bus number, the time, Carl's description. I had to find him. I called the bus company first thing, pretending to be a grandmother looking for a lost grandson. The customer service agent was polite, but said they couldn't give out passenger information without a police request. I hung up, frustrated. I needed to be patient and wait for Detective Miller, but every hour felt like an eternity. I decided to visit the bus station myself to see if anyone remembered Leo. The station was busy, with people rushing to and fro. I asked at the ticket counter, showing a photo of Leo. The clerk, a young woman, shook her head. She said too many people come through. I tried the snack bar, the newsstand. No one remembered him. I was about to leave when an older cleaner approached me. He said he saw a boy like Leo that day, sitting alone and crying. He tried to talk to him, but the boy hurried onto a bus. He pointed to the bay where the Oregon bus departs. My hopes surged. I thanked him and left. On the way home, I stopped at the police station to see Detective Miller. He wasn't in, but his partner said they had the manifest and were reviewing it. He asked me to come back tomorrow. I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. What if his name wasn't on it? What if it was? Back home, I checked my mail. There was a letter from Mark's lawyer, formally requesting I drop the charges and offering a settlement. I threw it in the trash. I wouldn't be bought. That night, I dreamed of Leo calling for me. I woke up in a cold sweat. The house felt emptier than ever. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, looking at Leo's photo. I remembered how he loved stargazing. We used to sit in the backyard and name constellations. I decided to go outside for a moment. The night air was cool. As I stood there, I saw a flicker of light from the house across the street. It was probably nothing, but it made me uneasy. I went back inside and locked the door. I needed to stay strong for Leo. Detective Miller called in the morning. The bus manifest had a passenger listed as L. Evans, Leo's first initial and our last name, paying cash for a ticket to Portland. It was him. He was alive, at least when he got on that bus. I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down. Now I had to find him in Oregon. Detective Miller said they would contact Portland police and send Leo's photo to bus stations and shelters there. I wanted to go myself, but Miller advised against it. It was a big city, and I had no idea where to start. I spent the day online, searching for missing persons networks in Oregon. I found a group that helps families and sent them Leo's information. Mrs. Gable came over with lunch, and we talked about what to do next. She suggested hiring a private investigator, but I didn't have the money after all the legal fees. I decided to focus on the trial and trust the police. Later, I got a call from Sarah. The trial date was set for next month. She said Mark was still refusing to talk about Leo. I felt anger bubbling up. How could he do this to his own nephew? That evening, I was watching the news when a story about runaways in Portland came on. They showed a shelter that helps teens. I wrote down the number and called them. I described Leo, and the woman on the phone said they would keep an eye out. She asked for a photo, and I emailed one. After the call, I felt a bit better. I was doing something. As I was getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. I opened the door cautiously and found a small package on the step. Inside was a bus ticket to Portland, one way, with my name on it, and a note. "Come alone. Tell no one." My blood ran cold. Was this from Mark's people, or was it a trick? I took the ticket inside and called Detective Miller. He said not to go, that it could be a trap. But what if Leo was there? I didn't know what to do. I didn't sleep at all, thinking about the bus ticket. Was it from someone who knew where Leo was, or was it another attempt to scare me? Detective Miller sent an officer to pick up the ticket for fingerprints. He assured me they were following leads in Portland. I felt trapped between hope and fear. The next day, I decided to focus on the trial preparations with Sarah. We met at her office, and she went over my testimony again. She warned me that Mark's lawyer would try to make me look unstable. I practiced staying calm and factual. After the meeting, I went to the grocery store. As I was loading bags into my car, a woman approached me. She said she was a friend of Leo's from school and had heard he might be alive. She said Leo told her he was scared of his uncle and planned to run away. She gave me a phone number she said Leo might use. I took it, thanking her. When I got home, I called the number. It was disconnected. I wondered if it was a genuine lead or another trick. I reported it to Detective Miller. He said they would check it out. That evening, I got a call from the shelter in Portland. They thought they had a match. A boy fitting Leo's description had been staying there but left a week ago. They didn't know where he went. My heart sank. He was so close, yet still missing. I asked if they had any clues, and they said he mentioned wanting to go to the coast. I spent the night researching coastal towns in Oregon. It felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. The next morning, Detective Miller called. The fingerprints on the bus ticket were smudged, no match. He advised me to stay put and let them handle it. I agreed, but the urge to go to Oregon was overwhelming. I looked at Leo's photo again. He had my son's eyes. I remembered when he was little, how he loved the ocean. We went on a trip once, and he collected shells. I decided to wait for the police, but I wouldn't give up. I started a journal, writing letters to Leo, telling him about my days and how much I missed him. It was a small comfort. As I wrote, the phone rang. It was Detective Miller. "We have a solid lead," he said. "We think we know where he is." Detective Miller's words filled me with a cautious hope. He said a social worker in a small coastal town in Oregon had recognized Leo from the photo and reported him staying at a youth hostel. Leo was safe. He had been working odd jobs and keeping to himself. The local police were bringing him in to confirm his identity. I booked a flight immediately, with Miller's blessing. The journey felt endless, but when I landed in Oregon, a kind officer drove me to the station. And there he was, sitting in a small room, older and thinner, but alive. My Leo. He looked up, and his eyes widened. "Grandma," he whispered. I hugged him tighter than I ever had, tears streaming down both our faces. He told me everything, how Mark had threatened him, how he stole money from me, and how Leo ran away to protect me. He thought if he disappeared, Mark would leave me alone. He was scared and alone all this time. We talked for hours, and I brought him home. The trial went forward, and with Leo's testimony, Mark was convicted on all counts: theft, coercion, and more. He received a long sentence. Leo moved back in with me, and we started healing together. We turned his old room into a space for his art, and he enrolled in online classes. I sold the house and bought a smaller place near the beach, where we could watch the waves and remember the good times. The revenge I sought was never about violence. It was about truth and justice. And in the end, I got my grandson back. We sit on the porch most evenings, drinking tea and talking about the future. The past is still there, a shadow, but we face it together. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stands by you. And Leo and I, we have each other. That's enough.